everyone, and welcome to Fluent English with Jane. Whether you're a beginner or an advanced learner, if you're looking to improve your English and speak more clearly, you're in the right place. In today's episode, we're diving into a topic that many English learners struggle with: how to improve your pronunciation step by step. It's not just about knowing the words, it's about how you say them, how you sound when you speak, and how confident you feel when communicating. And to make today's episode even more engaging, I have a special guest with me, Jackson.
Hey Jane, thanks so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here and talk about pronunciation. It's such an important part of speaking English, but it's often overlooked. People spend a lot of time learning grammar and vocabulary, but pronunciation plays a huge role in making sure you're understood clearly.
You're absolutely right, Jackson. When you have good pronunciation, you're not just speaking English, you're communicating confidently and naturally.
Yes, I'm ready. Let's dive in.
All right, let's start with a very basic question. Why is pronunciation so important in learning English? Why do we need to focus on it so much?
Great question, Jane. Well, even if you have a rich vocabulary and understand grammar really well, poor pronunciation can still make it hard for people to understand you. You can know all the words in the world, but if you're mispronouncing them, it can create confusion. Think about this. Imagine ordering food at a restaurant, and the waiter doesn't understand your accent or misinterprets what you're saying. That's frustrating, right?
Absolutely. When you speak clearly and confidently, the conversation becomes smoother. Pronunciation allows you to express yourself properly, and that's essential for effective communication. It's about intonation, the rise and fall of your voice, and stress, which gives your speech rhythm. Misplacing stress or intonation can make it sound like you're saying something completely different.
Exactly, Jane. Think about the difference between saying, "I didn't say he stole the money," with different stress patterns. If you stress a different word each time, you change the meaning of the sentence entirely. It's not just about saying words correctly, but using intonation and rhythm to make sure the message is clear.
That's a great point, Jackson. And you're right, confidence is key. When you feel confident about your pronunciation, you're more comfortable in conversations. And the more confident you are, the more you'll practice, and the better your pronunciation will become. So, it's all connected. Now, let's talk about what makes up good pronunciation. Jackson, what are the key elements that learners need to focus on in order to improve their pronunciation?
Absolutely. Good pronunciation is made up of several key components. First, we have individual sounds, then there's word stress, followed by sentence rhythm, and lastly, intonation. All these components work together to make your speech sound natural and fluent.
That's right. Let's break down each of these in more detail. First, there are the individual sounds. English has some very unique sounds that many learners may not be familiar with. For example, the th sound in words like think or though. It's a sound that doesn't exist in a lot of languages, so it can be tricky for learners, especially if their native language doesn't have similar sounds. Another example is the R sound in words like red, which might be challenging for speakers of languages that don't have a strong R sound.
Exactly, Jane. These sounds are where many learners tend to make mistakes. One of the best ways to practice these tricky sounds is by using minimal pairs, words that are nearly identical except for just one sound. For instance, the words ship versus sheep. If you don't pronounce the I and E correctly, it could completely change the meaning of the word. Or think of bit versus beat, a tiny difference in vowel sounds, but it makes a big difference in understanding. By practicing with minimal pairs, you train both your ear to hear the difference and your mouth to produce the sounds accurately.
That's such a great point. And another tip here is to practice listening to and mimicking these sounds. The more you hear them, the better you'll be at producing them. It's important to focus not just on producing individual sounds, but also on understanding how they fit into the rhythm of speech.
Absolutely. Now, let's talk about word stress. English is a stress-timed language, meaning that in every word, some syllables are stressed more than others. For example, in the word photograph, we stress the first syllable, photograph. But in the word photography, the stress moves to the second syllable, photography. If you stress the wrong syllable, It can make the words sound unnatural and sometimes even lead to misunderstandings.
Yes, exactly. The key to sounding more natural in English is learning to stress the correct syllable. A common mistake learners make is stressing the wrong part of a word. For instance, present, when used as a noun, like a gift, is stressed on the first syllable, present. But when it's used as a verb, like in I will present my project, the stress moves to the second syllable, present.
Absolutely. And learners often don't realize the role of sentence rhythm either. English sentences have a certain rhythm that's important for sounding fluent. It's the pattern of stressed and unstressed syllables. Think of it like a musical beat. If you get the rhythm wrong, it could make your speech sound offbeat or unnatural. For example, English speakers usually emphasize the important content words like nouns, verbs, and adjectives, while function words like articles, prepositions, and auxiliary verbs tend to be unstressed.
That's right. For example, in the sentence, I'm going to the store, the stressed words are going and store, while I'm, to, and the are unstressed. The rhythm of the sentence would sound very different if you stressed every word equally. English speakers rely on this pattern of stressed and unstressed syllables to make speech flow naturally.
And last but definitely not least is intonation. Intonation is the rise and fall of your voice when speaking. It's like the melody of your speech. When you ask a question, your intonation usually rises at the end, like, "Are you coming?" But when you make a statement, your intonation tends to fall at the end, "I am going to the store." Intonation helps to convey meaning, emotion, and attitude in your speech. For example, if you say, "Really?" with a rising intonation, it can sound like you're surprised or questioning. But if your intonation falls, it could sound more like you're disinterested or skeptical.
Exactly. Intonation is a huge part of sounding fluent. It's not just about the words you say, but how you say them, your voice, your pitch, and your emotional tone. Intonation can completely change the meaning of a sentence, and it helps convey your feelings and intentions clearly. It's so important to practice not just the words, but the tone and rhythm in which you say them. Now that we understand what makes up good pronunciation, let's move on to some practical techniques to improve it. Jackson, what's the first thing learners should do to improve their pronunciation?
Step 1 is listening carefully. This is absolutely crucial. You can't improve your pronunciation unless you expose yourself to as much natural English as possible. Listen to podcasts, watch TV shows and movies in English, and focus on how native speakers pronounce words and sentences. But don't just passively listen, take it to the next level with active listening. This means really paying attention to the way the speaker pronounces the words, and then repeating them out loud as closely as possible. You can even pause after each sentence and imitate the speaker's intonation, rhythm, and stress.
Yes, absolutely. Active listening is one of the best ways to improve your pronunciation. It's not just about hearing the words, it's about understanding the nuances of how native speakers use their voices. And a big tip is to also pay attention to the pauses and breaths the speaker takes, as this helps you understand the natural flow of speech.
Exactly. And step 2 is shadowing. Shadowing is a fantastic technique where you listen to an audio clip of a native speaker and try to repeat what they say immediately after hearing it. You should mimic their intonation, rhythm, and pronunciation as closely as possible. This technique is great because it allows you to practice without having to think too much about the individual words. Your goal is to mirror the speaker's voice. This is an excellent exercise for improving fluency and pronunciation simultaneously.
That's right. Shadowing helps your brain get used to producing sounds the right way. It trains your mouth to use the correct muscle movements. And it really builds your confidence as you begin to sound more natural. Step 3 is recording yourself. It might sound a little awkward at first, but this is one of the most effective ways to track your progress.
Recording yourself lets you compare your pronunciation to that of a native speaker. When you listen back, you'll notice areas where you need improvement, and over time, you'll hear how much progress you've made. The key is consistency. If you record yourself regularly, you'll hear and feel the difference. This is also a fantastic way to boost your self-awareness.
Absolutely. And another technique to consider is using tongue twisters. These are great for practicing tricky combinations of sounds that you might have trouble with. For example, the tongue twister, she sells seashells by the seashore. This forces your mouth to move quickly and precisely, helping you improve both clarity and speed.
And don't forget about the classic, Peter Piper picked a peck of pickled peppers. These kinds of tongue twisters are a fun way to train your mouth and improve your pronunciation, especially when it comes to difficult consonant clusters and fast speech.
Exactly. Tongue twisters are great because they make you practice clear pronunciation in a fun way. If you can say these fast and clearly, you'll be able to pronounce regular words much more easily.
So Jane, do you have any final tips or encouragement for our listeners?
My biggest advice is to be patient with yourself. Improving your pronunciation takes time and consistent practice. Don't try to rush it. Even 5 minutes a day will make a big difference over time.
I love that. And remember, mistakes are part of the learning process. Don't be afraid to make mistakes. In fact, making mistakes helps you learn and grow. If you get frustrated, go back to the basics. Listen, shadow, and repeat. Keep practicing every day.
Exactly. And remember, pronunciation isn't something you achieve overnight. But with small, consistent steps, you'll see real progress. So keep going and enjoy the process.
Well, that's all for today's episode. Jane, thank you so much for having me. It was such a fun and insightful conversation.
Thank you for being here, Jackson. And thank you to all our listeners. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to follow Fluent English with Jane for more great lessons. Keep practicing, stay confident, and we'll see you in the next episode. Happy learning, everyone!